we're gonna record it and post it and all the shenanigans.
Is he on Skype? Make sure he's got clothes on.
He is on Skype and he does have clothes on because he's a professional. Unlike some of the guests that I've had fairly recently who are not professional.
So he doesn't have pajamas on.
But he doesn't have pajamas on. He's got a great background and it all works. Welcome back to our big broadcast. We are coast to coast and border to border all over iHeartRadio and also AM/FM 247.com, TuneIn, iTunes, and of course TalkShoe.com, Spotify as well, and all the crap. Go to the website JiggyJaguar.com for more information. Twitch live stream as well each and every Sunday for the Sunday radio broadcast. And today we are joined by good old Jaybird Wells. She found her way into from Wichita, Kansas to Hutchinson amid the COVID-19 lockdown. She's even got a green screen today, but because I don't really know the Skype trick, it's just green. There's no background. It's just green. And then we've got...
and my birthday shirt.
And her birthday shirt. And we have John Mosier with us today. He is joining us. And we also have with us today a great guest. He is the author of Concussion Inc., Chris and Nancy, and Wrestling Babylon. And you can get more information, concussioninc.net. Irvin Munchnick with us today. Irvin, how are you, sir?
Hi. Good to be here. You're in Hutchinson, Kansas?
Of all places.
Okay, well then we're practically lawnsmen because I'm a native of St. Louis, which, as everyone knows, is the mecca of Western civilization.
The start of it, at least, yeah.
That is awesome. So, I got to know about you a little bit more details when you were on Dark Side of the Ring fairly recently. And you were talking about the Jimmy Snuka murder case. You wrote a book about this. There was a bunch of stuff in Dark Side of the Ring that they talked to you for a little bit, but you have so much more knowledge, so I wanted to have you on today to chat about this. Also, Jim Cornette, I don't know if you've heard his podcast, but he was a raving lunatic about the fact that they didn't use more of your footage. So,
wow.
I'm not sure.
I heard something by Jim Cornette. I think the raving lunatic part you have to grade on the scale on the curve because Jim is very energetic, but I do know that he's said nice things about my work, so I appreciate that.
So,
Nice.
Talk to us about some of the little minor details that they left out of this documentary, because I don't know if did they do it for story purposes or time purposes or.
Well, look. First of all, I'm gonna complain like anybody who's the essence of what he said didn't really get translated properly to the screen. So
yes.
I'm going to be doing some complaining, but the first thing I want to say is Dark Side of the Ring did a decent job of portraying in that impressionistic way that a TV documentary does, of making viewers understand, if they hadn't been paying attention before, that Jimmy Superfly Snuka, the beloved WWE superstar and Hall of Famer, whose peak was in the early 80s, that poor Jimmy Snuka, alas, did really murder his girlfriend, Nancy Argentino, in room 427 of the George Washington Motor Lodge near Allentown, Pennsylvania in May of 1983. So I give them credit for that. They pulled a ton of punches because this is a show, Dark Side of the Ring on Vice TV, that is pitched to an audience of wrestling fans. And so they have a need, as they have in other stories in their series that I'm very familiar with and have written about, such as the Von Erich wrestling family in Texas,
Yep.
and the double suicide of Chris Benoit in the Atlanta area in 2007, about which I wrote the book of record, and they didn't have me on. Their orientation is the complicated legacy of someone who did some dark things. In this case, it's murder, so I'm not sure the balancing act is entirely appropriate. But be that as it may, I understand that they're not going after this in the same way that I do.
Yeah.
Now, having said that, they flew me to Las Vegas last October, interviewed me for 3 hours, and left almost every important thing I said on the cutting room floor.
Of course.
Of course they did.
I did the original seminal investigation of the Jimmy Snuka Nancy Argentino incident in 1992, 9 years after it happened. I published an article about it online. It became chapter 9 of my 2007 book, Wrestling Babylon.
Yep.
But somehow, in the Dark Side of the Ring translation, the heroes of the story, and I don't care about being the hero of the story. Well, I care a little bit. I've got vanity like anybody else, but really it's about substance. Their story is about how two Allentown Morning Call reporters on the 30th anniversary in 2013 did a big story that led to the long overdue and futile prosecution of a dying, 70-plus-year-old man with brain damage and stomach cancer. So the charges got thrown out. Nothing happened anyway. And so the second part of the story, and what I wanted to talk about, at least in some depth, was about the story of justice delayed, justice denied. There was tremendous corruption in the criminal justice system in Lehigh County, Pennsylvania, that allowed Jimmy Snuka to get away with murder. Okay? And I've babbled for quite a bit, so I have more to say, but I'll stop.
No. We've got a great guest with us today. He joins us live here in our broadcast. He is absolutely amazing. Irvin Menchnick with us today. If I can talk there. We have got Jay Birdwells joining us in studio today. We also have John Mosier joining us on the old Skype-a-rooney. So Irvin, your book, you've written a lot of books. You've got a lot of information regarding the Benoit tragedy and also the Snuka murder. Which, as you were going through this, researching both of these cases, what was more shocking? Was it the fact that Snuka, basically killed somebody and got away with it for most of his life? Or was it all the stuff that surrounded the Benoit situation?
Well, I mean, they're both horrible stories, and it's hard to read them, James. But I think that, what I write about wrestling, I'm the nephew of a legendary promoter in St. Louis, Sam Muchnick, who is president of the National Wrestling Alliance for many years. In the era when wrestling was territorial, it was more like the mafia than the global brand that we have right now with WWE. Not to say that my uncle was an upstanding business person. I'm just using that mafia term metaphorically. But the point is, I grew up in this industry since I was knee high to a turnbuckle. So I became fascinated with pro wrestling when it became this global brand, thanks to cable television and deregulation and other factors. And so that's always been what's fascinated me about wrestling. So when it's my grim portfolio to be like Mr. Bad News. I tell some of the stories that other people don't want to hear, but as I tell them, what I'm really interested in is how it sinks in or doesn't sink in, because wrestling is this world of gray areas between real and fake, and people don't process things that really happen, like death, like disability of these performers who I have great respect for, putting their bodies on the line to entertain us, but the cost of that entertainment and whether it's out of control and needs to be better regulated is something that I hope people will think about.
So, John, you've seen both of these. You've seen the Snook episode, the Benoit episode. You've done a little bit of research here on our guest. I know you've got some questions, my friend.
Yeah. First off, just say, did you get your passion for writing from your uncle? Because I know he was a writer. Wasn't he a sports writer or something before he got into the wrestling promotion, if I remember right?
Yeah, Sam was a sports writer. Really, he was only a high school graduate. He was an immigrant from the Ukraine. and he got a job covering the Cardinals and the St. Louis Browns, but mostly the Cardinals for the old St. Louis Times, and it folded in the Depression in 1932, and he became a publicist for the local wrestling promoter, who was also one of the three big promoters in the country, part of the syndicate, as they called it then, Tom Pax. So that's how he got into wrestling. He had been a writer. Now, he didn't consider himself a great wordsmith. One of his colleagues in the St. Louis newspapers in the late 20s, early 30s was Red Smith, who became a Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist in New York and was a graduate of Notre Dame and was a very polished person and polished writer. But yeah, Sam was a writer. I don't know. I've just always, for whatever reason, enjoyed wordsmithing. Done it from a young age. I've actually been a professional writer for a half a century now, if you can believe it. But and I'm proud of my work. But a lot of it is like this Snuka stuff, where I can take it to a certain point, but I can't quite get the mainstream media to put what I think is the real narrative over the top. So it's challenging work, but it's fun work.
Also, I don't know, I haven't got a chance to see it myself, but Vice put up a extended cut version of the Jimmy Snuka story, so I haven't seen that. I don't know if it maybe includes a little bit more of what you said, but I mean, I can say firsthand, I was a indie pro wrestler, and I did some refereeing and different stuff, and I ended up refereeing a card in trying to remember, Joplin, Missouri, and Jimmy Snuka was on it. And I mean, it's like the time I met Jake Roberts, this was a long time ago, both of them were the biggest disappointments of my life, because the gentleman, I forget what his real name is, but he wrestled as a Metal Maniac. He was from Hawaii originally, and him and Snuka went around as a tandem all over the place. And he was basically Snuka's handler at the point. They brought Snuka in, sat him in a chair, and he stared at the wall for 3.5 hours and didn't do anything else, and that was it. He was pretty gone by that point, but that was the mid-'90s, so he's probably completely a fried vegetable by that point. It was even worse trying to work in the ring with them, because they couldn't get anything going. He was kind of half out of it. So the Metal Maniac said, "Give me a second." He threw him completely out of the ring. Snuka went over the ropes, through a table, and I don't know if that just woke him up or whatever, because then he was a little bit more cognizant, but I can see exactly where you're coming from.
Yeah, that's a really interesting story, and it does sound like it comes from that period where, Snuka, like that character in the movie The Wrestler, is like going back down the pecking order. He's a has-been. He's in the indies. He winds up in autograph shows, just signing his name for people who remembered him when. But to give him his due, at this period when the Nancy Argentino death happened, he was absolutely on fire, and he was truly a brilliant performer. And when I say that, I don't just mean that he flew through the air. He was thickly muscled and a flyer, which was like really new for its time. Yeah. He was freakishly athletic, but he also had really good ring psychology. I mean, you can't do that profession without having some skill and ability to adjust and extemporize. And he had all those things. He was the whole package. But he did, he was a burnout case. Not too many years after this horrible incident in Allentown.
Now, have you always been up in the Northeast, or did you start out like down in St. Louis, like your uncle, or?
Yeah, I moved to New York in 1979. I'm actually in California now, in the San Francisco Bay Area, where I've lived for more than 30 years. So still get back to St. Louis and see relatives and friends from time to time.
What I don't understand, to back it up just a second, why was Snuka so supported by his fans and everybody, and then all of a sudden years later that's when they turned on him? What kind of evidence what evidence came up that everybody just turned on him so quick?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, and by the way, I have not seen this director's cut version or whatever it is.
Yeah, I haven't either, but
so I will watch it, and hopefully it fills in some of the holes. I just want to say quickly that my big beef with Dark Side of the Ring is not just that, but they had an after show called Dark Side of the Ring After
Oh
Dark.
yeah, I heard
They
about
had
this.
they represented that to me as live to tape, so I thought it was my second bite out of the apple to say some of the things that I wanted to say, and it turned out that got chopped to shreds too, and it caused big blowback on social media.
Jesus.
And I think Vice TV has given a mercy killing to Dark Side of the Ring After Dark because it wasn't on last Tuesday after the latest episode, and I don't see it in future listings. I'm sorry, to go back to the question
Yes.
of why we're supportive of Snuka or ignorant of what happened. You have to remember that this is 1983, so there weren't as many means of disseminating information as we have now. But one of the funny things about the Snuka story is that there was a lot more publicity of the precursor event a few months before the death of Nancy Argentino than there was of the death itself. And the precursor event was a crazy domestic violence incident at a Howard Johnson's motel outside of Syracuse, New York, where it took multiple police and police dogs to subdue a maniacal, drunk, rage-filled
Oh yeah.
Snuka, dragging Nancy by her hair naked through the hallway of this motel. Just a horrible incident. Of course, like as often happens in these things, it went nowhere because the victim, whether it's with Stockholm syndrome or she was in love with him or whatever it was, just swore out an affidavit saying it was all a misunderstanding, and there wound up being only minor charges filed against Snuka, and he made restitution by donating to the local Ronald McDonald House or something.
I found that insane. I found that insane where there were just when they were talking about that, they're like, well, he donated some money, and I'm like, yeah, he donated the money.
Nancy Argentino, and there's some fancy footwork by Vince McMahon, the owner of a WWE, then called WWF.
Yes.
And somehow, and this is again the backstory that I think Dark Side of the Ring really fell down on the job of. They suggested some things, but they didn't name the names of the cop, Gerald Procanon in Whitehall Township, Pennsylvania, the district attorney of Lehigh County, who didn't file charges, William Platt, who went on to become a senior judge in Pennsylvania, and the current district attorney, a man named James Martin, who was an assistant DA in 1983 and did nothing, and I believe is abusing his power to this very day. And I think there's a public interest in broadening the scope of the story beyond just why wasn't Jimmy Snuka prosecuted, but why is the criminal justice system in that corner of Pennsylvania so corrupt? So it goes.
Do you think it was the money that came into the town from the tapings they did up there, like every 3 weeks or whatever?
Absolutely had to have been a factor and an influence. I mean, WWE at that time had a syndicated show called Championship Wrestling, which quite a few years was done at the Allentown Lehigh County Agricultural Hall. And they did it every 3 weeks, and it was on one of these tapings when the incident happened. So they had a local economic impact. The circus came to town every few weeks, and I think that certainly, in my view, would have chilled the criminal investigation more than these wilder theories that are out there. Some of them planted by Snuka's own 2012 autobiography, which said that Vince McMahon came into the climactic meeting with the district attorney carrying a briefcase. Wrestling fans...
That's always how it starts.
Right. I mean, they extrapolated from that to say the briefcase had money and there were cash bribes.
Exactly.
Now,
I'm not sure that's the way it went down. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if it was, if it did. I'm just saying I don't actually believe that.
Now, Irvin, this whole thing with Snuka, and I don't know if it's just the way that Dark Side of the Ring cut this together, but there's a scene in there where they talk about how after all this went down, Vince called the Argentinos and said, "Hey,"
I can't believe.
gave them a cash amount, and said, "Hey,
25,000.
yeah, 25,000. Would this help?" And
That's
they
like
were horrified.
guilty.
And then 5 or 6 minutes later, they show a scene where they go, "Well, they sued him in court, and they won this much money."
But
and
then
I'm
he
like,
never paid him.
okay, so her life wasn't worth 25 grand, but it was worth 500 grand.
I thought it was 600.
Maybe I'm looking into this differently than I should, but it just made, I don't know, it just left me with a weird thing.
Well, I actually think you are. First of all, Luis Argentino, Nancy's sister, told me the story of Vince McMahon calling their mother as long ago as when I was first working on the story in 1992.
Yeah.
So, again, I don't, I can't say it happened. It didn't happen. I wasn't there. But
Yeah.
I was told that many years ago, the same story that she told on Dark Side of the Ring.
Yeah.
Now, also to give a little bit of credit to Dark Side of the Ring After Dark, which I'm furious at for censoring them so much. They did have Greg the Hammer Valentine telling a story which is alluded to in my article, but not really explicitly teased out, which is at one point, not too long after this incident, Jimmy Snuka was caught by customs in the Middle East, I believe in Israel, with hash and drugs taped all over his body.
Wow.
And Vince McMahon, according to Greg the Hammer Valentine, paid $80,000 to extract Jimmy Snuka from a
Jesus.
potential Midnight Express experience in the Middle East. Well, I think that the cash gets handed around freely in
Well,
a world like
hold on.
pro wrestling.
Okay,
But
go.
Now I want to talk about the civil lawsuit.
Yes, let's talk about that. Then James
The
got a question
Argentinos,
for you.
the cop, Procannon, lied to my face in 1992 when I was there. He said Snuka told only one story, stuck to it. We know that he told between 4.5 and 6 different versions of what happened, depending on how you count. The different locations. She fell peeing by the roadside in one iteration. They had a lovers' quarrel. They were doing horseplay, and he pushed her too hard. So there's a whole bunch of different stories, not one story. That was just a flat-out lie. The other lie that Detective Procannon told me was that the Argentino family was completely satisfied with what they had come up with in 1983, which was that it was an accident, and he never heard from them again, except for settling the funeral bill. And that's just ridiculous because just 2 years later, in 1985, we know that the Argentinos sued Snuka for wrongful death in a civil lawsuit in federal court in Philadelphia. Snuka didn't show up. His lawyers claimed they weren't paid, and they withdrew. And the Argentinos were awarded a $500,000 default on which they never collected a penny, and that's another story. So if your suggestion was that the Argentinos were putting a monetary value on the death of their daughter and sister, I just have to say that they were trying to get some measure of justice.
Yeah.
After they got.
Yeah.
See,
Well, and the way you explain it there is how it should have been sort of explained in the documentary, because the way they explained it, I'm looking at this going, this makes them look really bad. But the way you explained it, they were wanting some sort of restitution.
I didn't get that takeaway, but I was really familiar with the background, and I think that they did try to, to give Dark Side of the Ring its due. They did try to do right by the family. In certain ways.
Well, go ahead, Jay.
I understand what you were trying to say, because from the documentary, that's what it came across at. But because of how I like to look at background stories.
Yeah.
I understood it that by them accepting that money would have been a bribe of hush money.
Well, that
And by
too.
them taking it to court, that would say, hey, more people need to look at this. This needs to become public, because that was a private phone call. And you can't prove a private phone call unless you had it recorded, and she obviously didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's well said.
Now,
That's
Irvin.
because I have a big mouth.
now, Irvin, chat with us about your connection and everything. Because you've done a lot of writing about the Chris Benoit situation.
Yeah, so my first book, Wrestling Babylon, came out in 2007, and it's a funny story because I went back to St. Louis to do a couple of book events, and they really didn't go anywhere. Going on an author tour, if you're not, really top best-selling author with a big promotional juggernaut behind you, is kind of a Zen experience. I mean, you never know whether 3 people are going to show up or 100 to see you read a chapter of your book. And in this case, it was a lot closer to 3, even though it was my hometown. So I'm on a plane back to California on Sunday night in June of 2007, and I said, okay, well, it was a nice run, but it's all over. And little did I know that as I was hurtling back to California, Chris Benoit was in the middle of a weekend rampage in which he murdered his wife, murdered their 7-year-old son, and took his own life in what was Time magazine would call one of the 20 most sensational crime stories of the year. So I landed back in California, and within 48 or 72 hours, I was Bill O'Reilly on Fox News and I were screaming at each other over the usual nothing. And ECW Press, my Toronto-based book publisher, had signed me up to write a true crime book about the Benoit story. So that's how that came about, and that book came out in 2009. And I'm proud to say became a huge part of the Oppo research when Linda McMahon, Vince McMahon's wife, poured $100 million into 2 failed campaigns to become a United States Senator from Connecticut.
Yes.
But I think the laugh is on me. She was in the Trump cabinet as administrator of the Small Business Administration. She is now chair of perhaps the most important pro-Trump super political action committee called America First.
Yes.
So the publisher and I had long thought that we would do what we're now calling the 3rd ultimate historical edition of the book, Chris and Nancy, The True Story of the Benoit Murder-Suicide and Pro Wrestling's Cocktail of Death. And that book is out now in ebook form only. It will be in a print version down the road when we get on the other side of this national crisis right now. But what I wanted to do, and in a new introduction, which folks can read online, they'll see that I'm trying to talk about Vince McMahon's business ties to Donald Trump, his sort of public communication style links to Donald Trump.
Yes.
And these are some of the important takeaways from the Chris Benoit story, much more than who did it and exactly why it happened. Who did it? Chris Benoit, not the butler, not another wrestler, not Vince McMahon.
Not Kevin Sullivan.
Not Kevin Sullivan. It was Chris Benoit. Why did he do it? I don't think we'll ever know why someone does something so heinous with great specificity. He had brain damage. He had chronic traumatic encephalopathy. He abused steroids. He abused painkillers, sleep aids, antidepressants.
Now,
so
didn't they mention about brain damage
in his right mind when that happened.
What'd you say, Jay?
Go ahead, Jay.
Didn't they mention about that he'd had some brain damage from multiple concussions?
Oh, no question. And of course, I've written a book called Concussion Inc., and that's the name of my website because I want people to understand traumatic brain injury dimension of football, pro wrestling, and a lot of things that give us a lot of entertainment and pleasure that we don't want to know. We don't want to think about the
See,
sausage
Darker aspect.
factory and the back room that's producing these things.
what I
There's
don't
a tremendous public health deficit from some of these fun forms of entertainment.
What I don't understand is for a long time everybody's known that brain tumors causes people to act different and their personalities to change and anger issues. I just don't understand how nobody thought about concussions doing the same problem.
Well, I've had a falling out with my former friend, Dr. Bennett Amalu, who's like the pioneer of contemporary research into CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy. And one of the reasons I've had a falling out with him is that he's tried, in I think a very vain and unbecoming way, to hog credit for discovering something and naming something that has been named since the 1920s with
Wow.
boxers. It's just that the NFL's influence and our public tendency toward denial has kept us for a long time
Yes.
from appreciating that the exact same phenomenon happens in other activities, most particularly football. And these injuries are caused not by concussions, are not bruises of the brain, but are caused by the sloshing of brain matter
Yes.
inside the skull.
Yes.
And the really scary thing that we've learned through all this CTE research is that it's not even necessarily caused by symptomatic concussions themselves, but just for years and decades of cumulative subconcussive hits that are, if not shortening the lives of a significant percentage of American males who do these things from the Pee Wee League level through high school and college, even if they don't become pros, not only from getting actual concussions, but just having their quality of life diminished by receiving so many of these blows over so many years and maybe not even being aware of it. It's very scary.
Now, John, jump in there because I know you got some questions about all this too.
Has John ever had any concussions?
Oh,
Me?
I'm sure
Yeah.
John's
I've had tons of them. I mean, that's my problem. Was your concussion book the first one, or was that after like the Benoit and stuff book? Because I could see where that would lead into it very well if the book about concussions was first. I didn't get to sit there and see what your timeline was on those. And then I tried to listen to your interview you had with Devin Nicholson of Hannibal TV, and the sound quality was terrible, so I couldn't really hear very well on it. Was that what you guys were discussing there, or was it more like far advanced? So I tried to listen to that last night, and the sound quality you had for it was terrible, so I didn't know.
I don't think Devin and I got too much into the brain injury thing in that interview, and I apologize if there was poor quality. It's all my fault on my end. I have to take it up with the tech staff at concussioninc.net. But to answer your other question, I'm proud of the Concussion Inc. work that I've done. I cannot, by any stretch of the imagination, claim to be first. Alan Schwartz of the New York Times started reporting this stuff in the late 2000s, early 2010s. I don't know exactly. Even he acknowledges that he's not first. That a lot of this stuff has been in the water supply for a long time. It just hasn't had the attention that it needs to get from major media. And what I do with my book Concussion Inc. and with my blog is not so much present the clinical information. I'm not an expert, although I think I have a good lay fix on what's going on. But it's not so much presenting that clinical information, but talking about the process of how information like this doesn't really boil up in the public conversation at the pace that it needs to. And I write mostly about what I call the ecosystem of Concussion Inc., which is the hack solutions that people have with newfangled high-tech helmets, or various things that people desperately come up with to try to say that we can continue things like football at the level that it's played at now, when I think the only solution is to downsize it in some sensible way, because we're harming too many American kids. We're harming the American male brain, essentially, by having so much social pressure for everyone to play this sport, which is only for professional gladiators of adult consent age. And even those people, I don't really know where they're coming from.
Well,
Yeah, I sit there in my history, like with stuff. I probably suffered from post-concussion syndrome and stuff and I could recognize that, and that's the reason I pretty much quit any kind of active things like that, so I could help let it heal, hopefully. Because my biggest problem is I have a real bad problem with short-term memory sometimes. Like, I'll think of something and I'll go walk to the other room to do it, and by the time I get there, I forget it. But like 3-4 seconds later, I'm like, bam, okay, now it popped in. And that didn't happen until after, I'd done a lot of competition. I played football, I wrestled amateur, I wrestled professionally, I worked as a doorman in nightclubs, so I got hit quite a few times in the head. And I could tell that it was more prone to things. And it's like popping your shoulder out. The first time you get a concussion, it's that much easier the next time, to a point. And that's the reason I just got away from all that.
I think a part of the problem is this new generation's coming up. We have a lot less nutrition in our diet than what we had when we were kids, and the kids' skulls are a lot thinner than what they were at our age. And so it's almost easier for this next couple of generations to get concussions, whereas it was harder for us to get concussions.
There's a lot of moving parts here. It's a very complex subject. I think there's also some evidence, though, that American parents slowly are voting with their feet or with their withheld signatures on consent forms. And there are a lot of areas of the country. It's geographically specific right now, but there are areas of the country where some high schools are having much more difficulty fielding football teams, and I do see participation declining over time. The problem with that as a society is that we're going to have the people entertaining us with football being those economically disadvantaged or African Americans who become our gladiator class, because that becomes their only or certainly very best option for success in life. So that it raises a whole constellation of social criticism and questions that I like. I don't think I have all the answers, but I'm very clear that the questions are things people need to be thinking about more.
We talk about concussions, and I have like flashbacks and PTSD. I don't want another one. I've had enough.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. That's the reason I got pretty much got it, so I don't do anything.
And now we can put a name on it in a way that we never could before. So we're conscious of it, and we've got choices.
I played football, but I didn't get concussions playing football. But I was a guest at a baseball game, and I got hit in the head with a baseball and got a concussion from it.
Yeah, she was in the audience.
Yeah.
I was just sitting in the audience.
Now, Irvin, as we wrap up here with you, my friend, by the way, I appreciate you making as much time as you did for us today, because this has been fascinating. I really do appreciate your time. I definitely want to have you back, because you have got a wealth of knowledge that needs to be out there. But, Irvin, before we let you go, how do we get your books, website, follow you on social media, all these things?
Okay, my website is concussioninc.net. That's concussioninc.net. And thank you guys for having me. This has been awesome. Really appreciate it. I'm at IrvMuch on Twitter. That's IRVMUCH. That's about the best my my aging brain can handle in terms of social media. I have a Facebook account, but I don't even know what to do with it. So
I'm
so
trying
follow
to
me on
find it.
Twitter and go to my website, and there are links to all my books and my many ebooks, which can be purchased either directly or on Amazon Kindle and other platforms.